part 3 of my introduction to Killteam videos for the absolute beginner. What I'm trying to do with these videos is, well, get my more casual friends playing Killteam with me, but also I want to help you guys out there that may be new to the gaming system and want to get involved in it. Hopefully we can break the rules down into simple, easy to understand steps and you can really start to enjoy this game. If you've not already, I'd recommend you watch this playlist from the beginning. We break down everything from the basics of dice all the way up to some of the more advanced rules week by week. This time we're going to be looking at the 3 phases that make up the 4 turning points that comprise the full game of Killteam. Before we do, if you could do me a favour and take a second to hit the subscribe button if you've not already. If you have already hit the subscribe button, thank you very much. Especially if you've interacted with me down in the comments or in any other way. I really do appreciate it, and subscribing and liking the video really helps the channel grow. And with that said, let's jump right on in. Turning points then. Well, we've already mentioned them in a couple of the previous videos. But what is a turning point? Well, I'm glad you asked. A turning point is made up of 3 individual phases. Those are the initiative phase, the strategy phase, and the firefight phase. Now, each of those phases, there's individual steps that we must complete to resolution before we move on to the next phase. Once all the phases are complete, that's the turning point over, and we move on to the next one until all 4 turning points are complete and the game's over. Firstly, let's take a look at phase 1, the initiative phase. Now, in the first turning point, there's an extra step that we need to do here. That is readying our operatives. What this means is giving the initial operatives inside of the game their initial orders, be that the conceal order or the engage order. Normally, this will be done at a later phase, but for now, in the first phase, this is where we do it. Once we've done that, we move on to finding initiative. Now that's the entire point of this phase. But what is initiative, you ask? Well, that's a good question, and I'm glad you asked. Initiative is a common theme that runs across many games, much like Dungeons and Dragons or other tabletop battle games. What initiative does is when actions happen simultaneously, then it lets the person with the initiative decide on what sequence those actions would happen. Since we can't have things happening in real time at the same time, we've got to do them sequentially. So the person with initiative would then decide what order those actions happen. Sometimes it would be advantageous for a person with initiative to decide that some actions that would happen at the same time happen in a given order that would benefit them. This is often the case, and the way that we get around that is by having initiative either pass backwards and forwards or be randomly assigned on the roll of a dice. How do we decide who has initiative then? Well, initially it'll often tell you in the mission briefing which player does start with the initiative. Be that the attacking player, the defending player, player 1 or player 2, it wholly depends on the scenario. From stages 2 to 4 in the turning points, then it's randomly assigned. Now that's done via a roll-off. What that means is each player rolls a single d6 and the highest value is the person with initiative. So it's randomly assigned from those turning points. Now, if there's a draw, then the initiative is passed to the person or the player which previously didn't have initiative. So if player 1 starts with initiative, in the second turning point, we roll some dice, both players get the same value of say 4, then it would be player 2 that gets the initiative. Then in the next turning point, we do the same thing again. We have a roll off and see who has initiative. Once we found out who has initiative, we're on to the next phase. See, told you it was pretty fast. And here we are in the strategy phase. Now, we've got a little bit more to do in this phase and it's broken down into 3 steps. The first one is we generate command points. The second part is we play any strategic ploys. And the third step is we reveal targets. Now, we'll treat it like the first phase and we'll break each of those down and have a look at what we need to do for each of the steps to progress through the phase. Generating command points then. Even more different types of points. Yeah, there's a fair few different types of points. We'll find out all about those as we progress through this Killteam journey. But for now, think of command points as a currency that you use to buy strategic ploys or tactical ploys. Either way, it's a currency that you use to give you either rules buffs or to perform specific actions using tactical ploys with our operatives. Now, in this step, we generate a single command point. Often, we'll start a game with a number of command points based off of the mission criteria. And often, you can generate additional command points at the start of the game by your list having specific criteria. Now, you're not obligated to spend your command points right away. You can save them up and use them later on in the game, and often this is really beneficial to do. That'll depend on wholly the type of player that you are, and also the very specific mission and objective type that you have. Now, playing strategic ploys. As its name suggests, we would play strategic ploys here. Now, how is this done? Well, we go in initiative order. Each player takes a turn in playing a strategic ploy. Now, they must have the cost in CP of the strategic ploy to play it. Each strategic ploy is then fully resolved as per the description on the card. Once that's done, then the next player chooses if they're going to play a strategic ploy as well. Now, assuming that they have enough CP to do so, again, the conditions on the card are fully resolved, and it passes backwards and forwards like this until each player passes. Once both players have passed in succession, that's the end of this step, and we move on to the next step. Here we are in the target reveal step of the second phase. What we would do here is, again, in initiative order, we would look at our TAC Ops cards. If you want to know more about those, check out last week's videos. So, we would look at our TAC Ops cards, and should we have to reveal any of those now to our opponent, we would do so in initiative order. Now, it's not mandatory that you reveal your TAC Ops, but make a note of what is said on the cards, and it's often that you have to reveal things at a specific point, which would be this point, to score the victory points associated with that TAC Op. Much like we did in the previous step, we pass backwards and forwards between players until both players pass in succession. And when we do, this step's over, and we can move on to the biggest and final phase. And here we are in the firefight phase. Now, this is the main body of the game, the meat of it. What we do here is we activate our operatives in initiative order, and we pass backwards and forwards between the two players, activating each operative and fully resolving any actions that they're going to perform. How do we do that, you ask? Well, it's really simple. Remember APL? If you don't know what that is, check out the first video in the series. APL is an action point limit, and what that is it's a number that gives you the opportunity to perform certain actions up to the limit of that number. So, using Custodes, again as an example, they've got an APL of 4. So, potentially we could perform 4 actions with an APL cost of 1. What we need to remember here is, unless you've got any specific rules, equipment, ploys, tactics, anything like that, then you can only perform 1 of each action during a single activation. So for example, we couldn't do 4 shooting actions. Remember back to the initiative phase, and I said in turn 1 we applied orders to each of our operatives, either the conceal or the engage order. Normally, this is where we would get to be able to change the orders for each of us operatives. As we activate them, we would decide if it's still going to have a conceal or an engage order. What do those different orders do? Don't worry about that, I'll come on to it in a moment. But for now, this is where you would change those orders in turning point 2 to 4. As we've already discussed, you would perform all of your actions and then move on to the next player. Where this is different is if you've got a GA, or group activation, of greater than 1. Now, some factions do have this. It's usually the Horde factions. So let's take, for example, Imperial Guard. Guardsmen have a GA of 2. So what this means is, as you're activating one operative, you would fully resolve their actions, and then you would immediately activate a second operative of the same type and fully resolve their actions, and then pass on to the next player. This is to represent those factions that are less elite but have more operatives on the board. Once you've done that, you'd pass on to the next player as normal, and they would fully resolve their action for a given operative. Assuming they have an GA of 1, they would just activate the single operative and then pass back to you. This passes backwards and forwards in initiative order until all the operatives have been activated on the board. After you've fully completed an activation of an operative, don't forget to flip over the activation token, or in some way note down that that operative has done all their actions for this move. Once everything's done, the turning point's over. That's it. And then we start again at the beginning, and it'll be a second turning point, third, fourth, until the game's over. Let's talk then about those two different types of orders, the engage order and the conceal order. What do they do and why would you use them? Well, let's look at the engage order first. As you might assume, an engage order is great for more aggressive troops. However, both of these orders have pros and cons. The engage order, for example, makes it so that you can do all the actions. However, it means you're also a more viable target and have less cover options. Mechanically, that works by allowing you to do any action at all that we've got access to. Don't worry, we'll come on to those in a later video. However, it does mean that also in light cover, you're also visible. So it makes you a more appealing target because you're easier to hit. Now counter to that, we have the conceal order. Again, as its name suggests, it makes you harder to hit. However, you don't have access to all of the actions, so you can't shoot or charge, but in light terrain, you are concealed, which makes you a much harder target. So there's pros and cons to each one, and really understanding when to use these and to change the order given to a specific operative really helps with playing the game to its fullest. It gives you that sense of a small elite force that is changing on the fly and gives you those more cinematic moments. Remember that the game only lasts 4 turning points and those can be over quite fast, so making best use of all the various mechanics that make up the game really help build that cinematic experience. To sum up for this video then, you should be able to understand an entire turning point now, which fundamentally is how we play the game. You should be able to find initiative, you should know how to play your strategic ploys and reveal your tac ops. You should also be able to work your way through the firefight phase using the individual actions for each of your operatives. You should also know what the conceal and engage order does, and you should be well on your way to understanding the core mechanic of playing Killteam. Next time we're going to look at those individual actions that make up the majority of the firefight phase and look at when we would use each of those actions in situations. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you very much. Again, if you've not already, please do consider subscribing or sharing the video with anybody that you know that might benefit from it. If you're interested in finding out what else I'm up to, then do follow me on social media. You can find me over on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, @Ahjay. You'll find me there. That's it for this week. Have a great hobby week, and until next week, remember, if you're going to do crack, make sure it's plastic. See ya!